For a long time, I didn't call myself a cartographer, but then I realized, yeah, I'm making maps, and this is what map makers are called. So yeah, sure, I guess that fits. The biggest attribute is curiosity and gumption. So, and I've interviewed a lot of people. The ones that stand out are the ones that say, "Oh, and I made this for fun." I'm like, "Oh, now we're talking. This is cool. This is a person who's intrinsically motivated. They want to do things. They're passionate
Mhm.
about this kind of thing. They're doing it
Yeah.
for fun."
Welcome to the Job Dictionary podcast. Today, I will be interviewing John Nelson to interview about what it's like to work as a cartographer. And John, where do you work at?
I work for a company called Esri, ESRI. We make software for mapping. It's called Geographic Information Systems, but it's just maps.
And is there another title for cartographer that might exist out there that people often confuse it for, or just it's also applicable to your industry?
Yeah, well, cartographer is maybe a little bit more specific within the industry. Within the industry, there's mapping and visualization, and then there are different specialty domains like geographic information systems. A lot of those people will do analysis and spatial statistics and planning. It's all under the umbrella of geography. So I'm a geographer who makes geographic pictures of stuff. And I guess that would make me a cartographer. Um, for a long time, I didn't call myself a cartographer, but then I realized, yeah, I'm making maps, and this is what map makers are called. So yeah, sure, I guess that fits.
Gotcha. And where are you located, John?
So I'm in the beautiful state of Michigan, and I'll get out my map of Michigan and show you where I'm located, which is right here in Lansing, Michigan, the capital of Michigan. So we were chatting about this earlier, but people in Michigan use their hand as a map. It's incredibly convenient, impossibly convenient. We all do it.
Yes. Are you from Michigan originally, John?
Yeah, I am. I grew up about an hour north of here in a town called Mount Pleasant, Michigan. Great little place. The tundra scraped plains of the Midwest.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you were a kid on that tone, what did you want to be when you grow up?
Oh, I had no idea. No idea. Even when I went to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. What I put, they ask you what your major is or what your intended major is when you're a freshman and you're enrolling and stuff. And the professors see that. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was just going to school. And that's kind of the point of like the first year or two, at least the first years, take a survey and see what grabs you, right? And I had no idea. So I put pre-med down. So I seemed smart to all my professors. And it actually worked one time. I remember they were doing a roll call and they said, John Nelson. I said, here. And they go, ooh, pre-med. Mm. And I was like, it worked. But
Yeah.
I found geography pretty quickly. I think in my second year, it was they called it computerized cartography. Now they would just call it cartography because this was like 25 years ago.
Uh-huh.
It's a big deal that we're using computers for this kind of thing. But it was great because it was this like weird mix of stuff that I really loved. I always loved art, like drawing and painting, just arranging things. And I was taking art classes, and I ended up minoring in art with the emphasis on photography. And I always
Mm.
liked traveling, and my family were teachers. And so we would have summers off and we'd pile into the station wagon and drive across the country and check
Yeah.
things out. And they were both geography teachers. And so I was steeped in geography since I was a baby. And then I found this class where it's like mixing art and geography. And I was like, this is really fun. It's fun. Like I'm having too much fun. This can't be right. And so I followed that feeling.
Awesome. And did you think that are there any certain degrees or certifications that are required to get into this job?
No, if you can trick somebody into hiring you, then go for it. There are advantages to having certain degrees. Most of the jobs that are listed, you'll see will be GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and cartography will be a component of that. And so it helps to have some experience with GIS or a degree in geography, with some emphasis in GIS at the academic level, or just experience. I know a lot of people who got a degree in anthropology or architecture, and then they found mapping and just get sucked in because they love it. And
Yeah.
like I did, but they do it after they graduate. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's kind of a neat broad assortment of people who got the bug and now, you know, make maps and love it.
And how long have you been a cartographer, John?
Well, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in the year 2000, which was a million years ago, if I'm doing my math right. And then later on, I went back to school and got a graduate degree specifically in GIS. They called it geoscience. But it was a mix of three things, three domains. One is cartography, the other is remote sensing, which is satellite imagery or air photo interpretation, that kind of thing, different wavelengths of light, collecting it via sensors and, fun stuff like that, robots in space. And then the other aspect was GIS itself, geographic information systems. And so the combination of those three were what I focused on in grad school. And I did research on usability. So what's the easiest way we can present this information to somebody, help them navigate an information architecture and find what they need and then remember what they found. It was a lot of
Gotcha.
fun.
Yeah. And so if you were giving advice to a young cartographer today, like what would you recommend them, go into, or maybe what systems would you suggest getting accustomed to? Maybe not the super advanced ones, but what like sort of borderline skills do you think would be useful for a young cartographer or an aspiring cartographer to take on?
Well, it's funny, Joaquin, but like the biggest attribute is curiosity and gumption. So, and I've interviewed a lot of people, and the ones that stand out are the ones that say, "Oh, and I made this for fun." I'm like, "Oh, now we're talking. This is cool. This is a person who's intrinsically motivated. They want to do things. They're passionate
Mm,
about this kind of thing. They're doing it
yeah.
for fun, as opposed to people who say, and here's a project that I did in my class, and here's another project that I did in my class because I was assigned it and I had to do it. And it was a group project, and I have no idea how much they contributed to the project, or how much of it is their original thought. And so my advice to students would be just goof around, play. It's always a little scary at first learning new techniques and software, and you feel like you're on these train tracks and you go one increment, okay, good, it didn't break, another increment, okay, good, and you're sweating the whole time, like, oh man, I hope this works. And it won't, over in time, things won't work and you'll get stuck and it'll be frustrating and scary, but eventually it feels a little bit more comfortable, and it lets you feel free to take some more liberties. I did this assignment, but I'm curious what would happen if I tried it with this different data set. And then you make something completely new and interesting to you, and that's really where you learn stuff instead of like following tutorials, which is important. um, Kind of making the process your own and saying, I followed this tutorial, but now I'm going to try it on something a little bit different, like a little bit different visualization. Maybe you found a cool video on YouTube that you want to follow. Go for it, follow it, and try those. Really, the stuff that you do on your own and like the pain you experience in trying to figure out the steps and figure out how that person did what they did is really how you learn. And I mean, it's open-ended play. That's the most important aspect of a creative person, is the willingness to fail and to try stuff in open-ended play instead of somebody who's just kind of taking rote uh, assignments and turning it in. It's a lot different, and you'll be a lot better for it, even in a professional environment. I mean, I say this to students, but I say the same thing to people in professional environments. Like they might say, Joaquin, and I hear this all the time, is, oh, I'd love to try this. I'm just so busy. I'm like, really? You're so busy you can't spare a half hour to, try and experiment or follow a tutorial online? It's called professional development. And it makes me sad a little bit for those people. Like they think they don't have time to do that. They have to be working on an assignment all the time. But it's professional development, and it's a creative market. It's a market for creatives. And if you just do what's assigned to you all the time, then you're going to feel worn down over time, and you're not going to branch out. You're not going to struggle. You're not going to grow or develop. You'll just kind of turn into a machine who cranks out maps the way that, they were assigned to you. So I advise people just to kind of go off the rails and try new things once in a while and experiment, and it's so important, so important. And so I'm rambling, Joaquin, but another thing that I advise students to do is share their work publicly on the internet. It
Uh-huh.
takes a lot of guts, but if you made a cool map and you're like, this is pretty cool, I'm going to drop it on TikTok, or I'm going to drop it on Instagram, or maybe even LinkedIn, big scary fancy place. Um, do it, because you end up building a portfolio over time, and people see that work and go, oh, that's really interesting and fun. And maps are just inherently cool and interesting. People like it. It doesn't have to be scary. Just go for it.
Yeah, and so John, as a professional cartographer, you kind of made it, to the top of your industry. So, what specific tasks do occupy like most of your day? And maybe describe it to us as if like you were describing it to a third grader or an alien, like whichever one you pick.
Sure. Well, I don't know if I'm at the top of my craft, but I'm loving my life, and I enjoy what I do, and I look forward to going to work every day. Work in air quotes. By the way, I work in a little woodshed in my backyard. It's 8 feet by 12 feet, a little box. I just
Uh-huh.
gave you the tour of my entire office, the Michigan regional office of Esri. It's a nice, curious mix. Um, I do a lot of user experience design for web apps. I work for, like I said, Esri, and there's a team here at Esri called Living Atlas, and there's just loads of data, and we'll make that data more accessible to folks, and oftentimes that means wrapping it in an interface in an app so you can explore it, like Landsat satellite imagery, or cool land cover data from Sentinel-2 satellites, or like algae blooms and where they're going and where they've been and how bad they are seasonally. All kinds of really cool things. So right now I'm working on a drought application, designing how it looks and how you interact with a drought app. So different places in different times are in drought, and you can view that historically, see if you can look for trends, and then see how that impacts the number of people living there and the agricultural industries there. So user experience design is a big chunk of my day. And when I'm not doing those things, I'll play around with the data that's in Living Atlas. There's so much cool data out there, and I'll make weird maps.
Mm,
I'll try to visualize it in a fun, interesting, maybe novel way that grabs eyeballs and captures some attention, and ultimately communicates something about the data. So data really is just a phenomenon, and you have to like blow the dust of the data away and try to look for structure. You're always
yeah,
looking for structure.
tell a story.
Data is
Huh?
just a means to that end. And so I'll play around with data um, and make something, because I have to make stuff, or else I'll be bouncing off these walls. And if I make something, I can't shut up about it. I can't keep it to myself. And so I
Yeah,
found that it's really fun and rewarding for me personally, and turns out professionally, to do how to's. Like, I made this map, and actually, here's exactly how I made it, the data that I
hmm,
used, the steps that I took to get there. And I want to demystify all that. I want everybody making maps. I don't want it to be this specialty thing where everybody thinks, oh, I have to have, all this experience in map and know all these terms and call myself this or that. I want you making maps by the end of today, Joaquin.
yeah,
Um, it's so fun. Making maps is fun, but sharing the process of making those maps, I found, is actually a lot more fun.
yes. And you have a
So
YouTube
that's
channel,
that's
correct?
that's like a standard day, some mix of that, a little bit of one, a little more of this or that, different days.
Yeah,
But in general, that's about what I do.
gotcha. And so you shared that you also have a YouTube channel. Can you tell us a little bit more about the channel and how that has helped you with that mission of kind of sharing the how to behind being a
It
cartographer and how to
sure,
make
yeah,
those
thank you.
maps?
It sure has helped me. You don't really know anything until you've had to teach it.
Hmm.
Until I learned that when I was teaching a lab in grad school. Like I could follow processes and click buttons and get the result that I was expected. But when you're teaching a concept to other people, then you really have to understand
Yeah.
it and summarize it and be able to explain it to somebody who's completely new to that. Um, the YouTube channel is called John Nelson Maps. So it's my name and then the word maps after it. And it came about because I was writing a lot of blog posts, how to blog posts. And you take a screen capture and you describe what it's showing. You take another screen capture and you say why you do what you do, and take another. And they can grow to be like these pretty unwieldy things. And I was also getting questions via email like, hey, John, do you know how to do this or that? And
Mhm.
I found myself making like just recording my screen of me, like going through a process of answering a
Yeah.
question and sending them an MP4 video. And I was like, wow, that was pretty easy. And it's like the clearest thing possible. All you have to do is follow along, play it in slow motion if you want to, but
Yeah.
you can get there and you don't have to do any guessing. And I thought, what? I mean, if that's useful to this person I'm emailing, maybe it's useful in a general sense to other people who make maps
Yeah.
and enjoy kicking around ideas for map making. And so I started putting them online. And man, I don't know, it's been almost like 3 years maybe since I started doing that.
Yeah.
It's hard to watch those early ones. They just aren't that great. But um, maybe the new ones aren't that great either. I'll probably feel that way in a year looking back at these. But I'm having a blast, and
Yeah.
people are really responsive, and there's great engagement. And they say I'll help them, or they'll have ideas for other videos, and it's super cool. It's a great field to be a part of. Different. I mean, it's so broad, Joaquin, because
Yeah.
I mean, you can make a map of anything. There's epidemiology maps for medicine. There's electrical infrastructure maps. There's,
Yeah.
marketing maps and sales territories and demographic maps and how those all work together to help you ask better and better questions. And the stuff I see people make, it's always just blowing my mind. Like, oh wow, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
It's such a cool and exciting thing to be a part of.
And then you want to replicate it, I'm sure. And I mean that we're going
Sure
into
do.
an election year, so we're about to see that big old map of the U.S. with the red or the blue state, um,
Yeah.
all over
Yeah,
the
and there's
news
so many
channels.
ways to show the same data. And that's a big concept in mapping, which
Hmm.
is there's no one right way to make a map. And you could, and a friend of mine did this. He took some election data and he wrote a book showing 100 ways to make a map using the exact same data, and each map is wildly different. And each
Interesting.
map will show you something
Wow.
different,
A
a
hundred.
different facet. It'll reveal something different about the phenomenon,
Uh huh.
and it's cool. I mean, there's not like this the ultimate map of elections and this is it, we did it, we cracked the code, everybody go home, and we'll just replicate this one over and over again. There's always something new you can bring, some new dimension of an election or whatever you're mapping to show. You would make a map and it would look different than a map that I made, and they would both communicate different aspects of something, or at least bring their own energy, because we would have different design senses and different interests. And that's why it's cool. More maps, the better. The more maps there are, the more understanding that kind of cascades out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an easier way for people to digest it. And that's why I love maps as well.
I guess it's a chart, like a geographic. It's a picture of data, but it's different than all. I mean, geography is its own data dimension, and
Hmm.
it reveals stuff and the proximity of things and the nearness of things and patterns that you can find and regionalization and outliers just jump out at you. It's a lot of fun. There's so much information you can pack into a map.
Yes. And John, on the back to you, like your role as a cartographer, are there any parts of your job that you might think are more exciting and interesting to you, like the YouTube channel, versus some that are not and are more hard, emotionally challenging, or maybe even more mundane or boring tasks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. And the answer is yes. So um, when I design a UX, I have to listen to the subject matter expert who knows everything there is to know about drought, for example.
Uh-huh.
And they've got a million different pieces of data and they want to do everything. And I'll listen to them and what they want to present, what they ultimately want the people who use the application to take away from it. And I've got to kind of distill that. And I'm not inherently bright, right? I can actually be kind of dense. And so the more questions I ask, it's just like a trick. Um, Ultimately, they'll explain it in a way where I'm like, aha, okay, I think I get it. And I take
Yeah.
note of that moment and I'm like, whatever got me to the point of saying, oh, okay, I get it. I just try to make a picture of that, and that's the interface. But doing all that work is, it's intellectually tiring. So if I spend a day working on design mock-ups for an app, or thinking about how to hierarchically organize information, how to visualize it, how you interact with it, and it's exhausting, and I'm tired at the end of the day.
Hmm.
It's cool and rewarding, and there's always something new, and I'm always learning, but it's tiring. It removes energy from my system. But when I really zone in and just play with a data set and make a map, it's interesting and invigorating and exciting, and my energy levels go up. It's like time just whizzes by. It's the end of the day. I don't even know what happened. Like, whoa, how did I just spend the whole day doing this? It's exciting. And making the how to, like sharing that process via blog post or video, it's even more exciting.
Yeah.
It's like energy into the bank, whereas UX design is energy out of the bank. But they're both cool in their own ways, but like one is energy in and one is energy out
Yeah.
for sure.
And I love that you put it that way. Like what task? I think that's a good way to maybe for me next time to phrase this question is what what brings energy out and what brings energy in into you. So I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that,
Yeah, it's a
John.
good question. Yeah, thanks, Joaquin.
And so, John, we're gonna actually transition into some rapid fire questions about what a day in the life is kind of like, or more questions about that sort of topic.
Okay.
So the first one is, what is the wake up time, start time? When is the end time? And when do you usually have breaks throughout the day?
Sure. Okay, so like the structure of my day, it's pretty consistent. I work remotely in Michigan. And I work for a company that's based in California, so I'm 3 hours ahead. And I'll get into the office around 7:30 in the morning, and it's not because I like waking up early or anything. It's just because that's when my kids go to school, and then
Yeah.
it's just all right. Might as well shuffle over to the wooden box and go to work. So I'll start at 7:30 in the morning, and I've got about 3 hours to really focus in quiet and solitude on whatever I was
Yeah.
working the day before, or whatever I was thinking of that night, the night before. Like, oh, I got an idea that I can try. There's about 3 hours of quiet. And then California starts waking up, and I'll get messages and emails and stuff. And that's cool too. But yeah, that's about my first 3 hours of the day. Um, I don't eat sometimes I'll skip. I don't eat breakfast. I accidentally intermittently fast. I don't know if you've heard.
Yeah.
I only just learned
Of
about
course.
intermittent fasting. I'm like, oh, I guess that's what I do, because I never eat breakfast. So
Uh-huh.
I just jump right into work. I'll have like a coffee or something. But sometimes I'll even skip lunch. But then, boy, will I just wail away on dinner.
Uh-huh.
Just go to town on dinner. Um, Lunchtime, I'll stroll into the house and see what's going on, play with the kids a little bit. Um, and I pick my kids up from school most days, except for right now, which is track season. And so
Oh, uh-huh.
they're in track practice until like 5, and so I don't have to do that. But I like it. It's cool to have that flexibility, to jump out and pick up the kids and catch up with them and have that reoccurring moment in those conversations throughout the day. And then I'll wrap up around 5 o'clock or 4:30 sometimes, and that cycle can be different year to year depending on when the kids
Right.
start school. Or if it's summertime and they don't have school, I'll tend to start later, which my body's natural clock will want to start later than 7:30.
Right. Of course.
Yeah, and then I'll just work a little bit later than I would have before. So maybe I'm 7:30 to 4:30 now, and maybe 8 to 5 in the summertime. But it's pretty flexible and pretty chill. Um, as long as we're productive and cranking out work, then not a lot of questions.
Yeah. And so what do you wear on day to day?
I'm remote, so I wear tops, but just undies on the bottom. No, I'm just kidding. Um,
Party at the bottom. Uh-huh.
yeah, I'm pretty informed. Looking at me, I'm wearing my zip up Polar Tech fleece with space shuttle patch. Um, this is about. I'm not a fancy man. Um, Pretty casual, very casual and comfortable. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I never wear pajamas. to work. That's important for remote workers. It's important to get up and change, and it helps you switch over
Yeah.
mentally into a different environment instead of kind of shuffling in my PJs. I won't do that. But yeah, pretty casual, informal.
Yeah, and if you could put a percent, like a number, what percentage of the time do you spend doing solo work versus more like of that collaboration with California and other people that work at Esri?
Oh, that's interesting. It's probably about half and half. Half the time I'm making some data visualizations and experimenting, and then sharing the how-to process or planning a presentation, something like that. Um, and then the other half is working on user experience design for presenting that data via website, and that involves a lot of consulting. And I've got great colleagues, just fun, fantastic colleagues, subject matter experts, and then developer and project managers are great folks, super relaxed, and but we move at there's Joaquin, there's this thing called the speed of trust,
Hmm.
um,
Yes.
and I see that happening, and it's very real. We trust our developer, and the developer trusts us, and the project manager trusts us all. And things just move so much smoother and faster when you have that sort of respect and trust for your colleagues, instead of like feeling constrained and like, well, I can't do anything until I get the go ahead in my meeting at 2. And you find yourself kind of sitting around and waiting a lot, or being apprehensive, or not taking risks. In a really comfortable environment of trust, things move fast, and there's a lot more. Um, what's the word I'm looking for? Is I don't know, inventiveness and
Yeah.
efficiency,
Uh-huh.
and the result it'll carry with it whatever energy was involved in the creative process of its making, which is weird, but it's true. I've seen it. Apps that were kind of um, hard to make, and maybe in a previous job we do custom work for customers. If a customer is hard to work with, and then you take less risks and you're less creative, and it's a very cautious interface,
Yeah.
um, and not very holistically thought through, and then you get a lot of bolt-ons. It turns out a little bit crappier, you know. But if it's good energy and in a good positive atmosphere, then you're going to make better stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, John, and you kind of talked a little bit about, being remote, working for Esri. Do you feel like, obviously you work from home, but can you leave work at the office, like as in the wooden shed, or do you take some home? And
They don't
is
let me
the industry in
leave.
general like pretty flexible
No,
about
there's a
that?
little, yeah, there's a sensor on my door, and they know when I'm here, and they know when I take. No, I'm just kidding. Um, yeah, I'll travel. I was just at Esri's campus a couple weeks ago. It was great to. Yeah, that's important for people who work remotely to do, is to
Yeah,
check in person once in a while. I mean, you and I are communicating with each other, and we're seeing each other, and it's great. But it's different than like someday if you and I have lunch together and we just chat about stuff and share a meal.
absolutely.
It's so important to do that once in a while, and I do get to do that, and it's great, really rewarding. I'll see friends and colleagues and associates at conferences, so I'll go to conferences and meet people, and get some kind of important social engagement there. It's important for people who work remotely to make sure that other people in an organization know that they exist, remember that they're around. And so when I was new to working remotely, I had to be intentional about it and reach out to folks. If I saw something cool, I'd send them a message on Slack or now Teams, like, hey, that was pretty cool, good job. Whereas if I worked in the same office or on the same campus, I probably wouldn't be as likely to do that. You have to be more
Hmm.
active in reaching out and engaging people socially
Of
because I'm
course.
removed. And so there's like a balance that you have to achieve. And it might include more kudos, more, hey, how are you doing? More just random reaching out than you would if
Yeah,
you were in person.
of course. And last question, the rapid fire: what tools or technologies do you use as part of your job? Like maybe like your top three tools.
Sure. Well, to make my maps, I tend to use a tool called ArcGIS, and there's like there's a desktop version of it and there's a web version of it, but in general, the whole umbrella is ArcGIS, and that's the map making tool that lets me do analysis. It lets me
Hmm.
play with the data and investigate the data. It lets me visualize that data in different ways. That's a lot of fun. So that's the big one. Um, when I make my videos, I use a product called Camtasia. So I'll record the video and I'll record my screen and audio through Camtasia, and then I'll use Camtasia to edit it all. And
Oh, awesome! All in one.
yeah, all in one, and it's great. It's a great little tool. And it turns out it's made by a company called Snagit, who's like 10 minutes down the road from me here in
Oh,
Michigan,
really?
which is
Wow.
great.
Uh huh. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm using good old Michigan grown tech. Those are the those are the two big ones. And beyond that, I
Maybe
suppose
like email or
I gotta
Slack or.
say it's Teams,
Oh,
Teams
okay.
and
Uh-huh.
email, so Outlook and Teams just to communicate. But I think Teams, and before that we used Slack. But whatever it is, it's that instant
The
messaging in a
communication.
professional environment, just to reach out to people, send them stupid memes and funny gifs, wish them happy birthday, and ask them questions about work and schedule meetings and that kind of stuff. That'd be number
Yeah.
three.
Yeah. And so, is there something you think that people underestimate about this profession, and maybe some things that they maybe overestimate about this profession?
Um, I think they might overestimate the complexity of it. It's a pretty easy entrance ramp. I mean, you can start really basic and make the most basic, do the most basic analysis or make the most basic map. There's just a couple concepts that'll help you go along the way. And we're
Hmm.
always learning and improving, and I'm always learning and improving. And so that might be a misconception. Is like it takes a special. I'm not a map maker. I can't make a map. I hope those map makers do this. Um, but we can all make maps. There's a lot of options and opportunities out there for anybody to do that. Um, so that's a misconception. Is something easier or harder? What do people think is easier than it really is? I don't know. I think I'm too much of an optimist to like. Maybe labeling. Like sometimes labeling can be a
Mm,
challenge, and there are automated processes for labeling. So like randomization, because you've got a
yeah.
million bits of text and you have to fit it this big. It has to be readable by a human being, and there's different
Right.
styles for each
And
of the
look
different
nice. Yes.
geographic levels. It's got to be attractive. That can be a challenge, and the automated positioning is a good start, but then oftentimes it takes like a human being's brain to sort things and move things around and organize them and make them bend and curve and figure out which ones are the most are the priority, and then other ones kind of fall around it, that kind of thing. I guess labeling is maybe harder than people think, but it's
Yeah,
also
of
kind of
course.
fun.
And so, John, question maybe for some of the listeners. Let's say I am somebody working already in the professional world. I have a job that I'm maybe not necessarily like liking as much, and I'm really interested in cartography. What is the fastest way for me to get into the profession, especially if I do come from a non-traditional background and I just want to get my foot in the door?
Oh, sure. So if you're not in that realm, but you're interested in it, and you're like, you know what, maybe I can make a go of this. My advice would be to look on YouTube for people doing cool things that you wish you were doing. And
Hmm.
the mapping community is actually really generous in sharing their process. There's a lot of cool people sharing cool how to's. Just follow it, see what tools they're using. There's a lot of options out there, and get your hands on some of that. There's varying expense involved, all the way down to no expense, and just try it out. Copy a map that you like, follow a how to that looks interesting to you on YouTube, and just do it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how fast you'll pick it up, and it'll be snappy, and you'll see data and be like, oh, I could actually make a map of this pretty quick. Um, and I recommend people do that. So again, it's back to that open-ended play. It's
Yeah.
it's called play, and it's a little bit unfortunate, but like it's so important, and it's professional and personal development. If you do that and you share your results and you put it on LinkedIn and you maybe tag some people who you admire on LinkedIn and ask them for feedback. Then
Yeah.
everybody who's connected with them sees the map that you made.
Right.
Um, you're off to the races, and and there are also certifications that you can get. You can take a single
Yeah.
course and get a specific certification. You can, take a 1 year certification. You can get an associate's degree for 2 years. There's any number of steps that you can take depending on how far you want to go.
And are these certifications online for the most part through universities,
A
or
lot
are
of
they like?
universities offer online certifications, and it depends on the institution, but some might be a single um, workshop or class that you go to.
Mhm.
Some might be like a 1 year one with a collection of courses, whatever works for you. And they're actually getting increasingly um, conveniently timed. Online, available on demand, and they'll have kind of cohorts that work together for a semester, but you can access the course materials whenever. There's also MOOCs. Do you know what a MOOC is? Have you ever heard of a
Mm-mm.
MOOC?
I have not.
MOOC. It's an acronym for Massive Open Online Course. And there's lots of MOOCs out there. So just free online courses. And the company
Right.
I work for, Esri, offers a bunch of them too. And if you sign up for it, it's totally free. And they give you all the software you need for the duration of the course, which is like 6 or 8 weeks. And then there's lectures, there's fun interviews, and there's
Yeah.
lessons. And I'm involved in some of those. And it's free. I mean, the price is right. If you have the time and the interest, you can check those out. MOOCs are a really good way of getting started, or just
Awesome. And
continuing if you are a professional already.
yeah, of course, I always like learning to get better.
Yeah.
And do you feel like there's like certain previous jobs that people like do before being a cartographer, or are there themes, or is it kind of random?
Again, it's funny. I've met so many no, there's two. There's architects, and so many people are architects, and then they have to take some geographic information systems class when they're a senior so they can put together like a field plan or site model or something, and they're like, where's this been for the last 4 years? I love it. So many GIS people I know are like formally trained as architects. um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny, but it's the similar kind of mental process, right? You've got these open-ended requirements and you have to try to distill it into something that's a concrete form. If you're making a
Yeah.
map, it's no different. If you're ordering a building from me and I'm an architect, then you're going to tell me what it has to be, and I'm going to try to come up with the right energy and the way to communicate that back to you as this structure that you navigate through. That's all a map is. Mapping and
Yeah.
architecture are the same thing,
There's that
just different
geospatial
materials,
interest.
just less
Uh-huh.
concrete involved in cartography than
Yeah.
architecture.
Gotcha. And how how fast does it usually take for someone to get really good at this job?
It depends on the person. Um, I'll give you an example, and I don't think she would mind. There's a cartographer named um, One May who, after 2 years of working in a local government as a GIS technician, I think, um, she got involved in the 30-day mapping challenge, which is like the social media thing. It was October or November, I forget which it is, but like every day of the month there's like a theme. You make a map based on the theme. Maybe the theme is migration, maybe the theme is blue, and you make a map
Mhm.
and people just jump in and have fun with it, and you just got a day to make it. And so they aren't always great, but she participated in it and shared her results on LinkedIn. And One May's maps were just beautiful things. Like, really, she's just gifted graphically and technically, and her maps were spectacular. Now she works for NASA doing
Mm.
visualization for the NASA, for a team at NASA. Like,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and she'd been working for 2 years, and now and I think That's so exciting. But really, it comes from somebody um, trying new things and experimenting and playing and having fun and coming up with real cool, stellar looking stuff that they're proud of, and then sharing it, and everybody sees it, and you accidentally build up this portfolio over time.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned it earlier before. So, like, what does someone have to be good at or like doing in order to be good at this job? Or like, what has to come easily to you? You mentioned curiosity. I think
Yeah.
that's like at the cornerstone of what makes a great cartographer. But what other traits would you say are very important?
Yeah, I was kind of vague on that one intentionally, but specifically, it's a pretty broad field. And I mean, there are statistical aspects of it, there are analytical aspects, there are graphic design, there are cognitive science aspects to this, physical biology of humans and the way our eyeballs work and the way we perceive colors. It's this really mixed thing. But if you're a person who's interested in um, thinking statistically, or um, if you're into communication, and that can take the form of writing. Writers make
Hmm.
really good cartographers because they can take concepts and put them in the minds of another human being via
Right.
symbols. That's a miracle that you can do that. It's the same set of skills for making a map. Um, People who are into kicking around technology, but I say technology, because a lot of this is digital, but there are really amazing cartographers who never touch a mouse. They're working in watercolor and they're working in ink,
Yeah.
and they make physical maps, and they're consultants and they're making a good living drawing and painting maps.
Yeah.
And so people who are artistically curious, people who just can't help themselves from sketching and doodling and drawing or painting, people who like solving puzzles that some analysis might solve or reveal. Those sorts of folks.
And so, kind of transitioning to the professional, more, I guess, career questions of it. What is the
Yep.
typical promotion path like, John? From entry to the highest position you can hold, and how much time do you usually spend on each level? Like, is it 2 years to be a certain type of cartographer, then move to maybe more of a manager role? Like, kind of educate me a little bit on kind of like the different roles as a cartographer. What's the typical promotion path like?
Wow, that's a good question. So I've had two long-term jobs in this domain, and the first one had no career path. It was just, but it was okay. We were working with customers, solving their problems,
Hmm.
designing solutions for it. Um, and I did that for 12 years. And my last day there was really similar to my first day there. I was just better at it and more efficient. And you have this accidental bit of experience that you can draw from and don't realize. And so you know what works and what doesn't. And you know how to interact with other people who are asking you to do some consulting. But it was effectively the same job. Um, I'm largely doing the same thing today that I was doing 8 years ago when Esri hired me. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about career paths, but um, I know some map making people and geographers and GIS people who you get hired as a technician typically.
Hmm.
Um, and then over time you become an analyst or something, and then you become a coordinator. And the coordinator might involve managing a certain number of people, and then you can become a director of a team and lead different teams.
Hmm.
Coordinator would lead a team, but then a director leads
Yeah.
a team of teams. So I guess in our field, that's typically the terms that I hear is technician, analyst, and then coordinator, and then director.
Gotcha. And how many years does it take to jump to the next one? Do you feel like maybe like two, three is like just
Yeah,
on
I would say
average?
at least two. I don't know if you'd like be it might happen faster or earlier on. So, maybe a couple of years as a technician, and then, yeah, okay, good job. We're going to bump you to analyst. That could happen in 1 year or half a year. I don't know. Um, but the next step, which is coordinator, it's more interpersonal and it's more of a management role. And that could take longer for people to kind of develop those soft skills. There's hard skills and then the soft skills. knowing how to
Hmm.
motivate people and treat people and look out for people, knowing how to
Right.
shield the people from, external forces and kind of be the filter for that, how to encourage them, how to get the most out of them, make them turn them into the best version of themselves so
Right.
they can be like Ted Lasso wants to do.
Yeah.
Um,
True leadership is service. Exactly.
yeah,
Kind of being
true
on the
leadership is
peripheral.
service. Yep, you look for the people who are working and on their knees. Those are the leaders. Yeah, it probably takes a little bit longer than those initial couple of bumps to make
Gotcha.
those managerial jumps.
Yeah. And so, John, what is the average salary for someone that is at your level? And you can provide a range, even if it's super broad. Or
Sure. My first full time job out of school was as a GIS technician. And it was in Massachusetts on an island for a Native American tribe. And
wow.
my pay was $32,000 a year. $32,000 a year. And it happened to be in a very expensive. Later, later I mapped the most expensive counties to live in the United States. This was the most expensive county in the United States to live in.
Really?
Out of all 13 cajillion counties, this was the most expensive one that you could
Wow.
possibly live in. It was Dukes County, Massachusetts, island of Martha's Vineyard. But it's where I happened to get a job. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and boy, it was tight, but we made it work. And really, my wife Danielle made it work. She's our financial panther, and she could figure out the money in and money out. And we didn't starve to death. I went back to
Yeah.
school, and then I got a job for a data viz company in Michigan, and that's the one I was at for about 12 years. I started at 35,000, so I got a boost when I started.
Yeah. Cheaper county too.
Much cheaper. Boy, did I feel the difference too. It was amazing. I felt rich.
Uh-huh.
But and it can go up from there. A lot of places, if you're there long term, you'll get like cost of living raises, or maybe you'll get experience. Cost of living might be, they try to keep up with inflation, so you're not like getting paid less than you were 5 years ago.
Right.
It might be
That's great.
3% or so a year, which is cool. And then you might get bumps, and then your salary will jump. In that previous job, I had like two or three like serious jumps in pay. And then since coming to Esri, it's like steady. They'll it's performance based, and so every year they'll talk to you and say, well, based on your performance, we want to give you this, and you're like, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so it's I suppose it's like buying something. Sometimes my son will ask me how much do tents cost, Dad? And I'll be like, well, you can go to Walmart and buy a tent for $50, or you can spend as much money as you can possibly imagine. Somebody would be happy to sell you like
Yeah.
the world's fanciest tent. So there's no upper end to it. Not to say that there's no upper end to like a cartographer's salary, but it goes up from the base. And I shared with you the bases, but that was 25 years ago, and then 8 years
Uh-huh.
ago. So it's
Yeah.
different now.
And what would you say the average is for, like, you're more like expert cartographer, like at your level or some of your colleagues' level, or like what's the range typically?
Yeah, that's a good question. Interestingly, a colleague, not like a company colleague, but like another cartographer friend of mine, whose name is Daniel Huffman. He does a survey of people who do freelance cartography work, and it's anonymous, and people who do that work can put in uh, their hourly rate, and then they'll kind of break it out by different demographic categories that they ask you that you can
Yeah.
optionally answer. But it's really interesting, and the most recent one, and this is personal consulting, which is different than like a corporate job, but
Right.
it ranged, I think, between like high $50 per hour up to like $80 per hour within some statistical segment. Um, but if you're working in a corporate environment, I think there are other benefits too, like health care and retirements. packages and that kind of thing, or bonuses that would push that higher.
Yeah, gotcha. And so you kind of mentioned like 30, 35,000, maybe a little, probably a little bit more, maybe like
Long time
40,
ago.
45.
Yeah. Probably
Yeah,
nowadays, I don't know, 50, 60.
gotcha. So that's like the bottom end of the range. What would you say is like the high end that you've seen personally or other people like a year?
Yeah. Well, probably like 100,000 plus at the high end. It's kind of interesting. You can, because the federal government hires GIS people and cartographers is like a subdomain of that. But if you look up GIS in open federal databases, you can see what those pay scales are. And I've seen over 100,000 in
Hmm.
there for cartographic roles
Gotcha.
for people who've been in their
And
position for a while.
gotcha. Gotcha. And so, John, we kind of talked about people that want to come into cartography, but I'm sure this has happened to you, or you know people that kind of move around. What field do people typically move on to? Like, what kind of work do they often go into next? Are there
Mm.
any themes that they can or that they can do or springboard into anything? Like, what do you typically see in terms of exit opportunities?
Yeah, it's interesting. Cartographers specifically, I would say they tend to stay cartographers and then just move into management or, mentor other cartographers on a team that grows underneath them. Um,
Hmm.
More broadly speaking, in GIS roles, which is the more analysis and like infrastructure and data focused side of making maps, what happens a lot of the time with those folks is they get hired for local governments, counties or states, and they'll get promoted. And the GIS department will be under the IT department, and then the GIS person will get promoted to be like head of IT. And I've talked to so many people who say, "Oh man, I miss making maps and I miss actual GIS." Like I just manage an IT department now. you know, that's cool. They might love it. A lot of folks might like. I don't think I would like that very much, but I've seen that as a natural progression for um, analysts at the local government level doing mapping.
And so we're nearing the end of the interview, John, but two more questions. If you hold on with me.
Yeah, sure.
So, what kind of books, resources, programs, certifications would you recommend to someone wanting to get into this profession? Are there like
Mhm.
any popular ones that you would not recommend, or any popular ones that you would recommend?
Yeah, sure. I do recommend the free route, which is find cool stuff on YouTube. The price is right. Another one is those MOOCs, so massive open online courses. If you just search the word MOOC and mapping or cartography, you'll find some cool options. Universities make them available. The company I work for, Esri, has some available for
Awesome. Uh huh.
cartography or spatial analysis or you know satellite imagery, that kind of stuff. Books. I recommend Edward Tufte's first two or three books about the visual display of quantitative information. Really great insights in a way of thinking simply, a way of distilling complex things into the bones and looking for structure. Edward Tufte, Tufte, great resource. More specifically to cartography, a colleague of mine, Kenneth Field, has written a book called Cartography, and lots of you know giant full page examples, and then the facing page is a description of that technique. So different kinds of maps, different kinds of techniques, any term that you can think of that's associated with cartography, there's likely an entry for that, and a big splash screen illustrating it, often beautifully, and then his description of it there. And that's a really nice and beautiful resource, Cartography by Ken Field.
Thank you, John. And any ones that you would not recommend, or maybe just like any, like I guess more expensive courses, or
I wouldn't recommend not doing something. If like formal academic path is the way forward for you, then that's great. I did that. If
yeah.
self directed learning is the best way for you, then go for it. I did that. Um, those books, but I don't think I would caution anybody to steer clear of anything in particular.
Gotcha. Thank you, John. And last question. Um, what would you tell your younger self who was just getting started into this profession?
Well, I've had some durations of unemployment after graduating, and it would have been nice if like current John could like put his arm around young, scared, frustrated, broke John and be like, "Hey, it's gonna be okay. It'll be all right." Because it sure is
Yeah.
hard to, it can be hard to find a job, and emotionally crippling almost when you don't find one right away, and you send out resumes and applications and you don't hear back. You do that hundreds of times. That can wear on you, but it'll be okay. Just keep grinding. Um, Something that I learned kind of the scary hard way on my first job was employers appreciate it when you just have your own ideas and go for it. You don't have to be assigned everything that you do.
Yeah.
You don't have to ask, what do I do today? What do I do now? How do I do it? Just have an idea and have like some self direction and reach out when you need help. But go ahead and try new things and work on projects that weren't assigned to you. So I would advise myself to um, listen to other people in meetings if they mention data, and they're not in the mapping domain. Hey, can I throw that data to me? Let me see if I can make a map of it for you. I'm just curious about something. Yeah, sure. Here you go. And so many people have never seen the data that they work with every day in a geographic context, and it'll blow their minds. So I would recommend myself, young John, hey, like look for opportunities to make maps out of data that you see out there, especially people that you might be working with, or a professor in a class that's not map specific. Say, hey, that sounds like an interesting data set. Can you share that data set with me? I'd like to maybe try to make a map of it. They're happy to do that. And it'll blow their minds when they see it geographically for the first time. They'll start
Yeah, of course.
drawing insights. They'll be excited, like, that's a pattern I've seen, but I've never seen it this clearly. That kind of stuff. So that's my old man advice to young John.
Awesome. No, John, thank you so much for joining us on the Job Dictionary podcast. If you want to reach out to John and check out his YouTube channel, you can also reach John Nelson Maps on YouTube, but you can also reach out to him on LinkedIn, John Nelson. And John, again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you coming on and providing such amazing insights.
It was a lot of fun, Joaquin. Thanks for the invitation. It was an honor.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we can better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!